This is part 2 of the portals exploration with Dr. Julie Krull. In the first part, we reflected on the evolution of Julie's show and her conversations with the people that come on her show and the journey of the transformation age and how it is evolving today. In this second part, we go deeper into the story of fractured grace and the nature of the healing process and the 3 stages, 3 phases of the healing journey, and how those insights are relevant for us through this time of trial and tribulation. And Julie articulates in a powerful way the fallacy of separation and how part of the healing process is truly remembering the essential wholeness of life and of the living process. So let's talk about fractured grace and how this, the story of fractured grace and your journey with writing fractured grace, because I have found that you have probably integrated 5 stories into one. There is the healing story, your healing story number 1. There is number 2, the finding of self and the finding of an authentic voice, story 2. There is, throughout the book, you are fashioning a meditative prayer and the way you work with yourself, with your own meditative prayer, and by way of inviting others into that, which is story 3. And story 4 is the story of the evolution of humanity and the contemplative brief with all those questions that you fashion often in the summary of the chapters. And then through the entire book, there is story 5, which is the story of the many faces of grace. So that's how I read the story. Now I give you back my experience with fractured grace by way of asking you, tell me about the story of writing fractured grace and what that journey was like for you.
Thank you, Aviv. I really, really appreciate your thoughtful response to that and your reflection of those 5 stories. I agree, those 5 stories are all in there. And I've kind of seen it as 3 that the book wrote me. So, but they're 3 narratives probably within the 5 stories, because I started a couple different books years ago and it was what it was, and I struggled to find that voice. And you mentioned that I found it in that I thought I had to be scientific and academic and prove and cite and it just never worked. And then I had an accident and snapped 6 bones in my leg. Freak little accident, ended up with a full leg cast, and the book goes on to end a long healing journey of misdiagnosis, and but when I sat in the chair, the book began to write me. So I had the healing journey, just like, here's healing, Julie. Start talking about healing, because that's what's happening on the planet. And my healing could help others heal, but we could look at the planet healing. So as I was writing the current story that I was going through, a couple of the other narratives were that my childhood mystical experiences began to weave through. And I couldn't not just story tell of past and then present and then future, and the future of the planet and what was happening. So it was to me, it wrote itself, but it was this nice narrative of, as I stayed focused and come back to center on what was happening in my healing journey and those struggles and trying to understand it, and myself as a healer of why can't I just, miraculously heal these bones. And so as I sat there, and then my lifetime started to weave through it as well, then I could see it in this larger context of humanity and where we're at on this planet. So that's how it wrote itself. I kept coming back to center in this healing journey, and then those stories just wanted to weave through. It was fascinating. When I first started, I just started putting everything down on little index cards, everything, just this mind purging of everything that I thought would be in that book. Just, and then in my mind, my mind wanted to organize it and create a journey. You know, my mind wanted to say, here's how you write a book, and here's what wanted to happen. So like I did these exercises of, I want to talk about co-creation. I want to talk about all these things. And then I put what I wanted to talk about away, put it all away. I still have the basket that it's in. It's on my altar at home. I just discovered it the other day because my granddaughter wanted to pull a quilt out, and all my cards are still in this basket that I had right there. But I put it away. And then the story wrote me and weaved together the past, present, and future into this 5 stories that you refer to.
And you tell about that first dance with the ineffable at the age of 4. When you write, on that day, the thin veil between worlds was fractured. Tell me what occurred on that day.
Yeah, everything began there, and put a bigger stake on it when I was 11 as a subsequent experience. But at the age of 4, I had chronic tonsillitis as a child. I was just always had a sore throat and was doctoring and was supposed to get a tonsillectomy, so my parents tell me. And one day, after another bout of tonsillitis and doctoring, my mother put me down for a nap. I shouldn't say doctoring, because by the time you hear the rest of the story, you'll say, how long was it before you were at the doctor? Who knows? My mother put me down for a nap and gave me Claret's gum. People our age might remember Claret's. It was a sore throat gum. It was green, and it was for sore throat. And I had a piece of Claret's gum and was chewing it before my nap. And later, my mom yells from the other room and says, Julie, wake up. It's time to wake up. And she's yelling at me from the other room, and I can hear her, and my eyes are open. And she comes in, and she sees my eyes open and me laying there, and says, Julie, it's time to wake up. And I just lay there and I ignore her. And her cry gets a little more urgent as she's walking. Stop pretending. This isn't funny. It's time to wake up now. And I'm laying there watching her with my eyes and just moving around, but I'm not speaking and I'm not moving. In my mind as a 4-year-old, I'm thinking, I'm pretending. She told me to stop pretending. Excuse me. She said, stop pretending. This isn't funny. And so I also feel this shame, like I'm a bad person, like, oh, I'm naughty, I'm doing this thing. But then my mother noticed the green goo just kind of running out the side of my mouth. When she walked over the other side, she saw this green coming out of my mouth, and then was alerted to, oh, something's really wrong. And it was then that I left my body and had a near-death experience. And my mother called my grandmother and my dad and rushed into the station wagon. And I just was hovering, watching them carry me out to the station wagon and going to the emergency room, and had the whole experience there, but had this really profound near-death experience as a young child. And later, when I was much older, they said, did you remember that? And I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you. You just named it for me, And I was a a child much older, I didn't know that I was that sick, but I was septic. And they called it toxic poisoning, blood poisoning back then. I became septic and my organs started shutting down and had so much infection in my bloodstream that it was critically ill and probably should have died.
And so when you retrace and download the experience to the updating process in you, how do you narrate in your own mind the influence, the impact of that experience? And the second experience that then happens later, I think you said at 11.
Yeah, at age 11. From that moment, it was a multi-dimensional experience that opens that veil, and it's like from that moment, I began having a very intimate relationship with that other realm and the divine. And I saw it as a God. With my upbringing and how I was raised, it was God that I would have a conversation with. Some people say angels, some people say, but these other realms were there, and I walked in both worlds as a child, not knowing that wasn't normal and not understanding ordinary consciousness versus the multidimensional experiences. So it was like this weaving through my life of that connection. And from that place, I saw the world very unitive and connected, and the realms very unitive and connected. I didn't see the separation. And so these experiences continued in childhood, and I'll just share that second experience because that's what became so formative in where I'm at today and who I am today. Is that I grew up between 4 and 11 wasn't pretty. Birth to 4 wasn't pretty. I think probably there was part of my soul that did not want to be in that life, did not want to be in that body, and did not want to, live. So who knows? I can speculate about that. The other important thing about 4-year-old was my voice, and laying there as a rag doll and can't speak, and I literally grew up with just chronic throat things and that not finding my voice thing. So those patterns started early, but from 4-year-old to 11, I endured way more chaos in my home life. There was physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental, emotional abuse. There was domestic violence between my parents and step parent, and there was just a lot of darkness in my childhood, and poverty, food stamps, like the shame of going to the grocery store and having people stare at you, and your mother's buying Pepsi or Coke and giving food stamps, and it just felt really yucky. So that was a part of my growing up, and then I had this other multi-dimensional experience that didn't resolve with that life experience. It was a very different reality. And at age 11, I was in one of those spaces and just walked outside, sat on the grass, said, I don't understand humanity. I don't get why they treat each other the way they do. How can they hurt each other like this? I don't get it. And part of me was asking to go home. I just want to go home. I just don't want to be here. I don't get humans. So I was having that pleading with my God, creator, source, as I saw it, and having that dialogue. And it was that moment that literally I left my body, much like my near-death experience, had this out-of-body experience, and just watched as my body ascended. And I saw little Julie sitting on the lawn, and then saw the neighborhood, and then went out into the cosmos. I had a very strong masculine presence with me felt much like a Merlin kind of being. And we went out into the space, and it was like watching, the earth was like hovering above my hands, like here's the earth, and it was like this little snow globe, and everything was nonverbal. Everything was like a Gnostic communication, just a very direct and just a direct knowing communication. I saw images of the planet around the earth, of this. It was like a movie reel playing of all of what I was complaining about. I didn't understand humanity, and images of war and violence and starving children in Africa. It just broke my heart. So I had that going on. We had the outside world going on, and then we had inside the home of Julie Krull going on. And so those images happened, and then I could see, this earth as one living system, and I could see these points of light as consciousness began to rise on the planet. These little points of light around Earth, little lights just lighting on the planet. It was just so sweet. And then they began to kind of connect, and we kind of see that with communications, advertising something now, where we connect the light, and that's what it was like. It was like this little connections. The lights began to connect all around the planet, and then it began to weave and created this field around the planet. And I could see, and it's hard to explain because it is the ineffable, but I could see the future of humanity. I could see the future of the planet, and I could see my role in teaching and speaking from that place of conscious evolution, of how we will wake, how we are waking, and what that creates. And the reels began to change, and we went to peace and unity and cooperation. And I could see these images around the earth as we're sitting there hovering in space. And from that moment, I just had this knowing in me. I returned to my body and just relaxed into the craziness a little different. Didn't really process it. I'm thinking back, at 11, like, who do you talk to about that kind of experience? I didn't have anyone to share that experience with, and just kind of held it. But it was comforting, and I knew, I just knew my role. I knew I was called towards something at that time, and I could relax because I saw the ending. I saw the movie change. I see that, and I wish I could give that to humanity. A lot of humanity seeing that first reel, playing around the planet. But that was the 11-year-old.
Yeah, and you are remembering that and retelling that as you tell your healing story. And remembering is another important word in your story. So how is that then informing the remembering that you're going through, of the significance of that inside your healing journey? How is it informing the healing process on the inside?
It's incredibly informing. The shift of having that experience then was almost transformative in itself when I broke my leg. And the important piece for me was that I discovered that I was afraid to use my voice. I was afraid to speak out. I was afraid to say these things and share these things. I was afraid of being ridiculed. I was afraid of not, the mystic stayed in the closet, and I had spent decades studying, getting degrees, going to college, trying to be a respectable professional on this planet, that the left brain, rational, logical person could listen to. But what I learned when I broke my leg, I had a guest on my show early. So my show starts, and a few months later, I break my leg. And Simran Singh was a guest, and she talks about the signs of the universe. And I had said in the break, at that time I was on AM radio, and we took commercial breaks 3 times during the show. And she said to me, Julie, what were you doing? This is how I broke my leg. I was literally, and I said this, I was mindfully taking baby steps down the hill real carefully because it was a slippery grass slope. So I said, I was mindfully, carefully taking baby steps down a hill. And she says, Julie, you're not supposed to be taking baby steps, and you're not supposed to be taking small steps down a hill. You're supposed to be leaping forward. Why aren't you, and she was like interpreting the universe, telling me, get on with it. And that it was almost as if that accident in the book activated that remembering in me and that confidence in me. And it was like, get on with it, Julie. Like, don't be afraid. Use your voice. Step out. And the world needs to hear this message. So it really was an activation.
And you write, how stunning, how magnificent. Our human bodies have an extraordinary and complex design. And to think, creation knows how to repair and heal itself. The same intelligence that creates the body heals the body. And you're in a journey to access and facilitate and be with that intelligence as you go through the healing story and as you write Fractured Grace. Say more about that journey and about that discovery of allowing the healing process to unfold by itself.
Oh, allowing the healing process to unfold by itself. So the healer in me was like, why aren't I getting better faster? I literally had to find a state of allowing. And when I would talk to guidance, it was like, no, don't go to healer. Don't do that yet. Don't do that. And it was such a frustrating isn't a strong enough word. It was really a frustrating process at first because I was ready to get up and go, like, okay, a few weeks in my chair and then I get to be up on crutches and go out to life. And it was like that message really wanted to come in and change every cell of my being. And if I could trust that intelligence that was there to heal my bones, I could also trust that intelligence to guide every step there forward. And it really was like this initiation of sitting back and trusting and not pushing. I've learned that because of those experiences, I've had a lifetime of mystical experiences and see the future. And because of that, I'm always like impatient, like, come on already. I always feel like I'm pulling this rope, like, come on already. Don't you get it? Like, come on already. And that was an initiation to sit in the designing intelligence and allow and trust. And I'm still learning those lessons of patience because I still have that come on already thing, but what I've learned is this way shower part that is awakened in me does have to be 10 steps ahead. So it's okay to come back and forth those 10 steps, but my job is to be the 10 steps ahead, knowing that what I'm thinking needs to be created here really isn't created till out there again. So it takes us back to the very first part of this interview when we're talking about walking backwards. And instead of stepping in this no-thing space, this liminal space. It's like now that intelligence is a little more integrated inside, and I can take those steps with confidence and ease. Whereas even before, I would be taking it, it's kind of like this. I have a coaster over there that says leap and the net will appear. Leap and the step will appear. And now it's like, okay, the steps are appearing for me. And there's that embodied remembering, which is very, very different than before.
There is also in what you are describing there the awareness that, and it's every time you elevate to a higher level of integration and perception and realization, it forces you, and you narrate it in the story in many ways, it forces you to, through another cycle of going through the need to integrate not just the initial fractured issues you were grappling with, but how that secondary and tertiary issues play out through the human story. And the message I decode in that part of the story is that indeed is the anatomy of the journey. We make a step forward and upward, and then we are caused to go on the ensoulment journey to embody and in the process transmogrify and integrate the new content that appeared that we couldn't quite see before, but that is now coming online and into the light because of the new expansive state that we have been able to access.
I love that, Aviva. It's a beautiful way of talking about this layering. It feels like there's this layering, right? And this process that takes us to a new height, and then it's integrated, and then there's the new, and it does feel like a cycle or a pattern or a layering. I also think as you speak that the process of imaginal cells coming together, it's like, so those are together and are creating organelles and doing their thing, and now more are coming together and more are coming together. So it's this processing and this layering, and the integration is such an important part of the embodiment. Is, we can't just keep that in our head and try to make sense out of it. It just really is trusting that same designing intelligence that created my body, that heals my body, is evolving my consciousness. And there's the surrender.
So can you describe into this framework you offer at the end of the book, where you talk about the 3-stage healing process, and you describe actually the way it happens with fractured bones and the way it happens with injury, and I have it in front of me, but I'd like for you to take us through it at a high level. What are these 3 stages? Because there is something in this way of seeing even this decade that we are unfolding, that will probably continue to bring us new surprise. What are the 3 stages of the healing process? And why is it important for us to appreciate these 3 stages?
Thank you. These 3 stages, with fractures and wounds, there are 3 stages. They call them different names in medical science. So I'll just use layman's terms for these process, because they're very parallel, which amazed me when I started doing that research. So the very first stage of a fracture or a wound is this inflammatory stage. And that's very common with both, where literally the blood supply goes there, so there's extra oxygen at the site of the wound or the fracture, which also means there's swelling and heat. So just pause to say, we can see on the planet when something happens, this swelling of attention and people rushing to the scene of, say, an earthquake, and we all go there immediately, and how can we help and do the search and rescue, and there's this inflammatory response. So even if we think about the Me Too movement, once that came into our awareness as this wound or psyche of who we were as a culture, the inflammatory response can be anger too, like this rage that comes at that. So this inflammatory stage is that first part.
And it is so important to appreciate that that is the first phase, because unless we appreciate it, we take the inflammatory response to be a condition unto itself that causes secondary issues, and it recycles you back to sometimes worse condition than the initial. This is why it is so important to recognize phase one and phase two.
Yes, and pause. And without recognizing it, we create greater injury as well. We can create more injury. So thank you for pointing that out. I think that's brilliant. So with phase two, there's a remodeling stage. So in the fractured bones, the actual calcium and the bone comes in to try to mend the fractures. And with wounds, the skin begins to grow over and mend the wound. And so that's that modeling.
You call the first the reparative stage in the case of bones, and in the case of the wound, it's the proliferation. So explain what happens in that second stage of the process.
So reparative and proliferation, literally, it takes the unstable bone and it begins to come in and model it, but not remodel, because this is you can't go there yet. It's literally sending the reparative contents to that area. So our body begins to do the weaving, to do the, imagine, there's a tear. We begin to stitch the tear together, right? As if we're doing that. That's the reparative, or the second stage is our body sends what it needs to that area to strengthen it again.
And it's the frustrating phase where we often experience that it's 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back, but because it has this cyclical process, because it needs to do the layer after layer after layer, and one day it feels like you have entered a new phase, but then the following day it feels like you're half a step back. And we see that in organizational systems, and we see that at the planetary theater at large. And then what happens as we move from the second to the third stage?
So, and another risk in the second stage is also that we feel so much better, we want to rush out, like, oh, we're done. And we're not. So that's another risk that we take. So then the third stage is that remodeling. So that stage is where most of the substantial healing of skin on the wounds, the new skin, the scarring, the bone with all the calcium. And we see, we all know what scars are. There's this extra support that's come in. And then the third stage takes a much longer time. We don't even imagine this, but years after we have a broken bone, the body is working to remodel and to smooth that down and to make that be so that the scarring doesn't prevent other ligaments and soft tissues and things from doing what they do. So it's a really important phase. And it takes way longer than the appearance of a wound or a fracture being healed.
So it's probably legitimate to say that we are forever healing, and we are probably in different aspects of ourselves in all 3 phases all at the same time. And certainly that is the case when we look at humanity at large. We are always in somewhere in an inflammatory phase. Maybe not always in our personal lives. Perhaps there are times when we are out of that phase, but there is something about accepting that this journey of healing is part of the nature of life. And this is one of the natures I'm experiencing in Fractured Grace, and one of the faces of grace that I'm experiencing through your narrative. It's the acceptance as one of the faces of grace.
Yes. I love that acceptance, the allowing and the acceptance is an important piece. And, we haven't even talked about illness. So perhaps we are always in a continual healing process, because not only a wound or a fracture, but a virus or a bacterial infection creates another healing response. And we know there's inflammation. I got a sore throat, my lymph nodes are swollen, and the body begins. So I haven't even talked about that kind of healing, but perhaps we are in a constant state of healing, that our body has that much intelligence that it's warding off and balancing our immune system and taking care of things. And I think it's a great invitation for us to think about our world in that continual healing process.
What is the function of tears and of cathartic sobbing inside the healing process?
Wow. You caught me speechless. This is a great question, because there's so much there that's important.
I could feel in the book when are you literally writing, and that is what accompanies the purging process.
Exactly. Yes. So the purging part, when you were talking about tears and then sobbing, with the cathartic release, literally. So from a creative space, I teach this a lot. And I've had a program called Beautiful Compost, and we do purge journaling. And if we think about purging, you think about just letting go. You don't purging as in throwing up, or purging as in diarrhea. You don't save that contents and do something with it. Literally, it's released and let go, and we can put things on a compost pile, and they break down and they become nourishing to us in a whole new way. Tears are like that purge. It's like we have so much content inside all the time, purging, the purge journaling, but we also have that emotional congestion and that emotional content that we store as well. And so the tears and the sobbing part and that emotional release is just as important as that mental release of just letting go. And both of them go together in the purge journaling, because sometimes we're like just barely crying, and sometimes we're really angry and we're mad and we're getting rid of that content, both mental, emotional, spiritual content. And, sometimes we're just sobbing and we can't even put the pen on the paper because we're so into those tears. But it's cleansing and clarifying.
Yes.
It's like, yeah.
And the chemical composition of the tears alters with the nature and the energetic quality of the tears, because self-pity or pain or frustration or joy or being moved by something beautiful, each of those will produce, it appears as though it's the same, but it's not the same. They actually induce a different chemistry out of your brain, and literally if you tasted those tears, they will have a different taste, because they are composed differently in the energetic essence that permeates that process. So being attuned and allowing that is part of the healing and enabling process.
It opens a whole beautiful conversation, doesn't it? Of just even the healing of the waters on the planet, and healing. If our bodies are made of 99 point however much water, some people say 86 or 87, but most people will say 99% water. Imagine the healing on the planet and just the correlation between our tears. I love that you bring that shift in chemistry with the condition of the tears being released. Energetically, we know emotion feels different. We know what an angry tear feels like. We know what the tear of awe and beauty feels like. And we know what that sob of grief feels like. And so I love imagining that with our waters on the planet and how we can heal one another from that understanding and that wisdom of the waters being encoded like this. It's an amazing thing to ponder.
Because in what you're describing, Julie, there is that sense that you can sometimes experience a very personal grief, but you can also, the human has this capacity to process the grief of another or the grief of another time. And as you do, there is part of the transmogrifying, transmuting of that energetic content in service for the release and the reintegration and the re-emergence of whatever that experience or episode. And there are no shortage of opportunities on the planet right now to offer that service. We are approaching the end of our time, but I'd like to just maybe one or two more areas to explore. You write, we are the dance of integration, of intellect and intuition communing in a sacred unity, of head and heart engaging in synergistic play, of masculine and feminine dancing as one, of body and spirit merging gracefully, and of you and me interbeing as whole. How do you experience this awesome merging integration of that creative masculine and feminine? This is one area I've been so afraid to ever approach in conversation, because I feel that when we are able to heal this one on the planet, the unlock creative power, what can actually emerge, is so extraordinary. So in the way you describe the merging and the integration of the masculine and the feminine powers, that is the big unlock potential for humanity. Talk to me, describe that and the way you experience those dimensions.
You know, there are so many wonderful thinkers on the planet that do believe this is the key moving forward. This is the one. So your intuition is spot on with so many thinkers that say, let's do this one. You know, yesterday I had a talk, and one of the questions was this, which was fascinating. We were talking about showing up in the wholeness of who we are, and this man, a very masculine man, said, I try to bring my tenderness to work. I try to bring my vulnerability and my whole self, and I try to integrate my masculine and my feminine. But if I show up, I always have to say, but don't violate my boundaries, because it doesn't mean that I'm being feminine. You could push me over. It doesn't mean I'm weak and vulnerable. And he said, I'm really tired of saying that to people, but I feel like I have to share that when I'm being feminine, in my feminine, and balancing my feminine masculine. If I show that side of me, I feel vulnerable and weak. So then I'm telling people, don't treat me like I'm vulnerable and weak. And it was a fascinating thing to hear that question, because I just heard that morning in another interview where a woman was saying, I can't be a strong feminine person. I can't, if I go to the workplace and I am a strong masculine woman, then I'm called the B word. And there's something wrong with me. And it was fascinating that I heard both those on the same day. As men try to step into the balance of masculine feminine, as women try to step into the balance of masculine feminine, it is weird. And what I describe is so say I'm feminine and I'm over here, and as a woman, I'm mostly feminine, and I swing to embrace my masculine. Sometimes it feels like the swing goes way over here. And then I swing back, and I'm practicing, and that feels so like 180 degrees opposite, right? It feels so foreign to us. But the key is, and I always like to, when I feel polarization, I always bring the third element of spirit in to resolve the duality, to resolve the polarization. And if we bring that wholeness into masculine, feminine, it can help us to have balance, because the swinging makes us feel crazy, and we're not this or that. It's not an either or. So as we stepping into our masculine, feminine qualities and learning to balance as this species and get out of our heads about it. But when we bring the divine in, when we bring that third force in, it brings us more into wholeness. So we see that all of it's kind of important. It's like there's no separation and there's no polarization. It's not 2 points. So I'll just show this one more thing that's coming through my head at this time, because I love this. One time I asked Source, which is, I never stopped those conversations since I was 4 years old. And I said, help me understand polarization. And I wrote about an experience in the book of the very heated political debates of 2016, and having a family member and just come out and get so angry. And I was so hurt. And I went to bed that night. And I'm like, help me understand this polarization. And what I saw was fascinating, but I'm going to simplify it because this one image is so profound to me, is a Mobius strip. So if we take a piece of paper, and a lot of times we take this linear and there's these 2 points and we're so polar opposite, right? They're just two polar. And then, so if we take the Mobius strip and we say one side is masculine, one side's feminine. So imagine coloring one side a yellow highlighter and the other side's white, whatever. So we're thinking it's opposite, it's different. And if we take the Mobius strip and we just twist it once and tape it together, there's this continual journey, this experience that never leaves either of those. It's like the feminine moves into the masculine moves into the feminine. And we're sitting here moving along that Mobius strip and we never leave it. We don't have to flip from one side to the other side. We don't have this continuum that it's just moves from here to here. It becomes this inversion of all our polarities on the planet, all of our polarities, from conservative right wing to liberal left, all of them invert, high, low, cold, hot, anything we want to look at. Intellect, spirit. And that Mobius strip just moves us in this inverted expression of all of it, and it can become whole within us.
And the way I experience what you're describing is that additional third dimension that you describe as spirit. I also see this as a double helix with a vertical dimension, because there is the invitation that I sense in the story of that man. The 2 episodes of yesterday showed up on your screen. That part of the escape and transcendence of polarity is that we can reach for this other side at a different elevation, at a different elevation. So for example, and it's very tricky when I use words, because anytime I use words, it locks us. Do you mean that this is how men are and this is how this would be the case with women? No, I'm talking about the archetypal feminine and masculine energy. So for when she says, I want to embrace the masculine, the way I hear this is not the harsh, aggressive, attacking at all. No, it's I'm embracing my higher capacity to offer clarity of purpose, alignment, sense of directionality. That's the archetypal masculine nature. When I say, and I'm reaching for the embrace of the feminine nature, I'm saying I'm reaching for the creative, embracing, holding capacity. So those are forever manifesting in this movement that you're describing, always forever at a higher and a higher dimension of their nature. So we continue to unfold or unlock their growing potential. And when we do that, the invitation I just heard in the way you responded to this group yesterday, and what you offered is, we are actually here, and the way we heal each other is we release the higher possibility of the people we interact with, and we can all reach for the masculine and the feminine potential. As you're describing, we are never not inside the unified field that embraces and enables both of those energies to work through us.
Yeah. We're never not. My advice to the one man was to show up, to be fully embodied and be all of that, to be his whole self, to be the feminine, masculine expression of him, like of Julie, of Aviv, and to come and to show up, even if I might not express in a vulnerable way in this workplace that doesn't feel safe. My vibrational frequency of that integrated whole, that frequency, just like you're saying, it's like it transcends, right? It raises an octave. We're really informing the field. So if I can come up and come to work and show up as my whole self, even if I'm not speaking from a more feminine or masculine, the male or the female, but show up as my whole self and raise that vibrational frequency. What we know from physics is everything in the field will attune to that higher level. So we're inviting even the workplace to attune to that and to transcend and include where we've been, to move into what we haven't even envisioned as possible yet.
My final two questions. These words you use, radiant light, unbounded joy, they mean what for you?
Wow. It's funny how time perhaps will evolve even how I experience radiant light and abundant joy. Is that how you said that? Yeah.
Unbounded, I think, joy is what you...
Unbounded joy. Yeah, not abundant, unbounded. Literally, I'm surprising myself in that this last year, when I said I've been in this real formative, liminal, creative space, the prior Julie would have defined unbounded joy by social norms. And I think I had this expectation, number one, I was going to be the best darn mom on the planet, and giving birth and watching my children. I mean, that was like it, I had so much unbounded joy. And I assumed, being a grandparent would be the same kind of thing. It's like I have no alignment with those social norms anymore. It's like a prior mental definition of radiant light and unbounded joy has disappeared. And the surprise and the delight of what radiates from within is it. It's like that beautiful sunrise or that beautiful sunset. It's like a new bloom of a flower emerging from the ground. There's just this trust in this designing intelligence that moves through me into that unbounded joy and radiant light now. in the past, I would see this, light coming from the other realms and coming in the central channel, and how we've tried to describe things for, decades of exploration into the new age. None of that is it anymore. There's just this eminence of radiant light. It doesn't come from anywhere or go to anywhere. It just is.
So I have a special request for the closing round of our conversation, which is that I'd like you to speak your uncensored words to to my near to be 3-year-old granddaughter, but not just to her, but to the toddlers of the world. Because every morning when I get up, and I have several practices that I go through, but one of the things that I do every day is I talk in my thoughts, to the toddlers of this world. And first I speak to them because when I speak to them, it connects me to my purpose. And it tethers me to what I'm here to do for the rest of this planetary journey. And I also want to reassure them that we're busting our sides, we're doing the best we can, they're not left on their own, although when they look at many of the adults around, they can feel lonely the way you felt lonely when you were at the age of 4. And this little 2-year-old, she's the kindest, gentlest being I've ever come across. I'm sure I'm not the first grandparent to say something like this, but it's not just her. It's what I sense and feel is the potential and the significance of new souls coming here, souls and spirits coming here for the planetary journey. So I want you to speak to them and to their future, whatever it is you feel like saying as a closing message for us today.
Thank you. Just as an observation, when you were speaking, I am writing letters to my granddaughter who's 4. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of how different those letters are for her than how I would speak to the 4-year-old inside of me, which is so interesting. And the thing that I love about my granddaughter is that she's a precocious 4-year-old who loves all the Disney movies and can sing and belt out the words to all of these amazing songs. And so it reminds me of the message for our littles, that staying in the mystery and the discovery is such a sacred place. And when we can really tune into those butterflies in the yard and follow them back to the flowers and watch them and just be with them, we're learning. And the whole idea, I mean, I could go into all kinds of teaching tools like I have with my granddaughter who I'm writing these letters to for my next book. But the thing that's precious to all of us as 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds is relaxing into that allowing space and play. This is one of my lessons that I didn't get. I didn't learn. And as we're allowing these toddlers to just be in their natural state of being and playing, everything is perfect and enough. There's nothing to change. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to be frightened about or be worried about. So, yeah, little toddlers, like, you are enough and you are perfect. And the world may look scary to the big people right now. To most of our littles, it doesn't look scary. And there's some wisdom there for the big people that are tuning to the big scary things.
Thank you. Stay in the mystery. Relax into the playground of living and of being yourself. You are enough. You are everything that you need to be. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.